As a reminder, this session will be recorded. If you aren't comfortable with that and don't want to be recorded or have your presence recorded, a recording will be made available after the call, which you can review and watch. And with that, I'll like to turn it over to Karsten and get things started.
Thank you, Matt. Just make sure my sharing is visible. All right, welcome everybody. We're going to talk about Microsoft Sentinel and compliance for defense and industrial base customers or corporations or companies. A lot of things are changing. A lot of things are new to us. And, you know, CMMC is certainly a thing. We've been working around CMMC for quite a while now, and we're learning a lot. And Sentinel is becoming a very central part of how we navigate requirements and results and controls in this space. So compliance evolution, what has changed, and let's take a look at what the frameworks actually require, and that will explain why we are looking at Sentinel, right? So it has certainly evolved from being a mere documentation exercise into becoming a highly evidence-driven compliance conversation. So we work with customers in the compliance work, from creating SSPs into assisting in audits, and the experience is becoming very normal when the auditor says, "Show me." So this is something that is becoming more and more normal, that we actually use the tools. We use what's available to us to show what is being done, what controls are being met, how they're being met, and of course, the evidence is then in the data and how you present that. Continuous security monitoring, especially with CMMC Level 2, is another part that is newish. NIST 171 and 53 back in the day had some verbiage about it, but it's become more solid with CMMC Level 2. As I said, the operational proof for assessment, we need to show what we're doing. We can't just say what we're doing. And very often back in the day, we used a lot of screenshots. We said, this is how it's configured. No, I want to see it in real time. I want to see it in your environment. And especially with cloud services being at our fingertips, you can't really argue, you can't get to it, or you can't show it because it's right there. So the role of Sentinel is to make this visible, to enable organizations to show what is happening, where is the data, where is it coming from, and what it is the result of monitoring or settings in the environment. So what the frameworks actually require. There are for CMMC, there is 110 controls inherited from NIST 171, 800-171. And these requirements are there to help protect CUI in particular, right? And to be able to respond, and detect and visualize, detect and respond to threats. And compliance is no longer about what you intend to do, is to show that you are actually doing it. So this is a list I created. These are some of the controls where Sentinel provides support for controls that are found in CMMC Level 2. And you see it spans multiple control families. The one that we learned about first back in the day when we heard about CMMC was to track and report incidents, be able to have an incident handling capability or capacity. But another thing that a lot of customers didn't have a good way of doing is the first control here, how Sentinel can support centralized log collection. The Sentinel is very often thought about as being a, security tool, incident management tool. The Sentinel's major role is really log management from the underlying log analytics workspace. This is where you can also set up log retention. I don't think there is anything in this presentation or the conversation that really talks about this, but our recommendation, without it being set in stone, you won't find this in a control, is to retain your logs for 1 year. That statement or that recommendation requires Sentinel. And as you might know, we have all sorts of capabilities using just the XDR portal without Sentinel. The XDR portal, however, has no retention settings. You can retain data for 90 days in the XDR portal. So that's a bit of a trigger for us. We, as I said, lead with a recommendation of having data retained for 1 year. So Sentinel as the evidence backbone. And as I talked about, we centralize telemetry and we centralize audit evidence. And if you're not familiar with Sentinel, it's a cloud-native SIEM. It's designed in the Microsoft tenant to centralize security telemetry and to correlate activity across systems. As I said, with the retention capabilities, we can retain the audit data, and we can make it visible. We can work with it in a central location, and I'll show you how this looks like in a little bit later here in a demo. This fact that we are centralizing the data becomes a super tool in audits. We can use Sentinel. We can use many tools in there. I'll show you another way to work with CMMC actually from Sentinel. But the data, the presence, the connectivity of data and telemetry is all controlled with Sentinel. As a side note here, there's a lot of activity from Microsoft, and maybe some of you have seen the service message that the Sentinel UI is going away. I think it's within a year, where customers will have to use the XDR portal to leverage Sentinel. Now, Sentinel as a service is still going to be there associated with a log analytic workspace, so you can do the log retention. As I said, that's one of the things that we cannot do in the XDR side of the Microsoft tenant. So Microsoft 365 is very often the primary use case for the tenancy. Of course, we can have Azure workloads, and a lot of customers use both, right? But what is important to understand about Sentinel, it can really widen your horizon. It can pull in data not only from your Office 365 tenant. I can pull in data from other clouds, for example, AWS or Google Cloud, to mention a couple. And this helps pulling telemetry into a central location. Now, for those of you well versed in compliance and CMMC, maybe you understand and you have heard about compliance boundaries. So pulling telemetry in from another cloud doesn't simplify your boundary work. You still need to define those boundaries. If you have CUI, you need to define and showcase the CUI flow. And if your boundaries are such that AWS, for example, is a part of your boundary, then pulling security telemetry, activity telemetry into Sentinel becomes even more important, or you'll have to jump around multiple systems, multiple services, and multiple log sources to find evidence that things are actually being watched and controlled and protected. Connectors also can be from on-premise. So via Defender for Cloud that integrates with Sentinel, you can pull workloads in from on-prem. So servers on-prem, they can be what's called Arc onboarded to Azure. And once I do that, I can create log ingestion, telemetry from servers. It can be whatever is needed from that server, diagnostic logs, security logs. And I get that into a central location as well. The multi-platform capability, of course, if your boundaries goes to multi-platform, is important. But maybe more important is I now, as a unified source or a centralized location, can show evidence of controls, of telemetry and data points from all these clouds. Another interesting aspect, people often look at the Microsoft presentations and we read a little bit about Sentinel, we read about Defender for Cloud, we see the multi-cloud support. What kind of falls off the radar screen sometimes is data sources such as firewalls. So if you have a on-prem environment, maybe you have your devices enrolled to Defender for Endpoint, maybe your identity is integrated with Defender for Identity, and you have firewalls on premise, we can also pull firewall logs and telemetry into a centralized location. That gives you, of course, the visibility of controls, so firewall policy actions, right? But more so, and this is what we're not going to talk too much about today, is Sentinel's ability to correlate signals across all of that, including what's happening in a firewall. It makes your correlation very powerful, and we can see what actual actions a user is doing from an endpoint in your on-premise network. So from an operational perspective, security and operations teams, they use Sentinel. Of course, identity and access oversight, this is critical. So the most important data source we have, of course, is sign-in logs. Sign-in log sounds narrow. It's an incredible wide table of data that comes with Sentinel, where we of course connect Entra ID with or without your Active Directory synchronized to Entra ID, so it can be cloud-only identities or hybrid identities. And this gives us the ability to really dig deep into what is happening in sign-ins. And this is where I talked about correlation. Incidents are something that Sentinel builds from correlating events across identities, authentication, authorization, endpoint signals and network data. If we have firewall data, that would also be used in correlations. When something is found or correlated into such a state that Sentinel qualifies this as being an incident, that will be surfaced in the Sentinel console, of course. And a quick mention with XDR again, these incidents are synchronized bidirectionally with XDR as well. So I want to say for most of you out there with a Microsoft tenant, you can use Sentinel from the XDR portal today. You can use the UI. That was just a side note. Continuous monitoring is actually something that has become called out as a control item in CMMC. So just seeing data coming in and getting incidents from things that happens now, that is one part of controls, but the continuous monitoring show that you can view things over a time horizon is called out in controls in CMMC. Now, finally, for the operational side of Sentinel, we can use automation and we can use playbooks in Sentinel. So if you find a scenario that happens more than once, for example, we can create playbooks and make that an automated response to what happened. I don't have any good examples for that right now. It could be a risky sign-in. A risky sign-in is literally designed to, one of the primary things it's designed to detect is if someone logs in from California and shortly thereafter logs in from Virginia, that is supposed to be impossible. There's a couple of things that can trigger that. One is that you share credentials with someone across the states. The other one is that you disconnect and reconnect using a VPN to a different region. Either case, this is important to know. Maybe we're not allowed to use that VPN, and we're certainly not allowed to share credentials. All right, so the Sentinel's impact across control families. I showed you that table earlier. Sentinel impacts several control families. It spans the audit and accountability family, the incident response family. As I said, this is kind of where we started with Sentinel as a CMMC integrator. The risk assessment support, so we can do risk assessment and show the evidence for doing so. And then the access control and authentication. So some people might say, well, I have the sign-in logs in Entra ID and I have the activity log in Entra ID. And sure you do. That's the source of the data that we play to Sentinel. Again, though, retention matters. So we play the data from Entra ID, sign-in logs and activity logs into Sentinel. So we have it in the same log collection system. So I talked a lot about Sentinel and how, obviously you can hear in my voice, I'm a fan of Sentinel. I do use it for a lot of things. But Sentinel, whoops, sorry. Something happened to my slide. There we go. No? Sorry, I got lost in my slides here. Okay. So I talked about Sentinel and everything it can do. There is certainly things that Sentinel can't do. So we specialize with Sentinel for the monitoring, detection, response, and the retention of both incidents, but also log data. In many cases, there's many controls that requires other and extended controls, extended services. For example, if I have a VM sitting in Azure, as an example, I certainly need workload protection. That's where we use Defender for Cloud. And this workload protection and its telemetry gets played into Sentinel. So then, of course, the Defender for Cloud is the workload protection, and it's a complementary control. If our point of view is looking at this from Sentinel and out, right? It is there are many examples of that. Policies can be one, human process can be another one, and other services. I mentioned Defender for Cloud, Defender for Endpoint is another one, Defender for Identity. So all the workload protections. And then there is other underlying things that we don't necessarily see as a standalone service, but something that is apparent everywhere. Again, focusing on the cloud environment, a Microsoft tenant, everything has a diagnostic aspect of it. And these diagnostic signals is also signals that we want to capture and retain. Not necessarily require them to be stored for a year, but we want to see those signals because, again, we want to let Sentinel take a look at those signals. If something all of a sudden starts showing abnormal patterns, we like Sentinel to see that because this can be used in classifying something as an incident. The shared responsibility model, this is where Microsoft has a ownership of a status. I can use encryption, for example, as in Azure. The encryption itself, if I choose to protect a server with what's called encryption at host, that's something that Microsoft provides and attests to. It will be FIPS 140 aligned. So they are filling their part of the responsibility where the operator needs to enable it. That's the operator's part. Well, the operator also needs to report on this and show evidence for it. So that also becomes the operator's responsibility. So this is where the shared responsibility model comes into play. So the compliance positioning for Sentinel, it goes around the monitoring, the comprehensive monitoring. Cross-platform might not be a thing for everyone, but it's certainly there, and it's an ability. The unified view of security and security operations and/or telemetry is absolutely a place for Sentinel. The incident investigation, incident response and handling, that is a part of the controls of CMMC. And of course, the audit evidence retention. So this is where, as I said many times by now, we can demonstrate that we have the audit evidence, that we can show the auditor that we have put in place controls, that they are active and that they're functional. And this is where we get compliance through visibility. It's very easy for an auditor to say, show me MFA, and you can show a log that shows that MFA is alive and active and does what it needs to do in your environment using Sentinel. So I'm going to jump off the presentation here for a second. I want to show, I have a couple of demo scenarios. And this is where I'm going to use Sentinel. If you have a keen eye here, you will see that this is a .com environment. The same is true, that it works exactly the same for these examples here and across Azure Government or Azure Commercial. I just happen to have data here in this tenant, what I'm using here. So I had pre-made some queries here that we're going to take a look at here. You see here. So this is first activity based on the user. This is my own account here. And what I'm looking at is what happened, what did I do, how did I do it, where did I come from, and of course, what was the result of the resource I accessed or tried to access. But this is a by itself evidence, and I keep an eye on, I monitor my sign-ins, my authentications and authorization, because without authorization, any of these authentication attempts would fail. So here I go a little bit deeper into events from sign-in logs. I'm choosing just to look for conditional access policy, multi-factor authentication. I pick up what are the settings for MFA, and also some device details, an application name, username. So if I start sliding over here, you'll see I'm authenticating to Office 365. For some reason, there is no MFA required. And there's a policy name where this individual probably is excluded. You see, it's not applied. And because it was not applied or not required, conditional access status is successful. Scrolling down here, I should hopefully find some failures as well. Here is one where I have someone that is trying to log into this environment from outside of US. And we have in our conditional access rule a measure for not allowing non-US locations to be used to access this environment. So it will show up as some failure here. Again, good type of evidence to show the auditor that yes, we have MFA, yes, we do authentication logging, and that we have conditional access in place that prevents login scenarios that we are not accepting in this environment. Here's a different way of looking at something of the same. Again, MFA required, not required. This can be something that an operator would take a deeper look at to see why is there so many logins where we don't have the MFA requirements. So this is a good statistic to look after. This last one here, this goes after, let me see here, just make sure I'm looking at the right one. This one, I'm sorry. So this one goes into the area of risk assessment. So I'm looking for all sorts of resource type access. I don't exclude anything. I also don't deliberately include anything. I let the query go out there and look through my sign-in logs to see what's happening in my sign-in logs. Where do I have volume? Where do I have different settings? So this can go into both risk assessment, but also ongoing monitoring, because this one is something I would like to look at historically. And if you look at, there's a couple of interesting facts just by pulling this up. In fact, I need to go find out why it is. I have sign-ins here. Someone failed accessing this application that is also not identified in my directory. Maybe someone removed something, or someone was able to deploy an enterprise application that is not supposed to be here. It's that we have an illegal grant somehow. So this is an interesting find. But these are examples of how I can use Sentinel to not only monitor my environment, but this is how I show the auditor, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and here are the results. Very easy for auditors to accept these findings. I mentioned earlier when we talked about controls that there are ways inside of Sentinel to actually help work with CMMC. There is a workbook out here that Microsoft produced, and it's something I can use to help navigate how I take care of CMMC controls and services out here. So let's take a look at what this one can do. I'll be real quick here. So here are the control families in CMMC. So if I go to access control, for example, I can say, okay, let's look at authorized access control. It expands controls, or the primary control here from CMMC, and I can quickly see what are my primary services here: Defender for Cloud, Azure Active Directory, and Intune or Endpoint Manager, right? But also secondary services. Now, recommended logs, again, I say sign-in logs is my logs. Now, you need to remember what I said about retention, right? So the sign-in logs in this environment, they of course exist in Entra ID, but they also are played into Sentinel. And when looking at this, you actually can see the results if I look at accounts for how the control applies actions of that account. So very interesting workbook in Sentinel that you can play with, and you can learn a lot about your system. And again, one of the reasons this is useful is that in this environment, I pull all relevant logs into Sentinel, so Sentinel has visibility to the signals. All right. So I'm going to leave my demo here. I'm going to scroll through here. So my late part here, licensing, or what we can take away from what we talked about so far. Sentinel billing is based on data. So primarily, cost with Sentinel comes with retention of data. Office 365 connectors are primarily free, so we don't pay for the ingestion. There are connectors out there that comes with an ingestion cost, so that's something to learn about and figure out. As I said, the majority of the cost around Sentinel comes from retaining data. So in a normal Office 365 tenant with some Azure workloads, I get free ingestion of all the telemetry. If I have Azure workloads and Defender for Cloud, I get free ingestion to Sentinel for up to, I want to say, 50 megabytes per day per server, because that you're licensed in the Defender for Cloud. There is a new direction, new service coming with Sentinel that I've not included anything about here because I don't have access to it yet, and that is the data lake for Sentinel. The data lake for Sentinel should be very interesting for any customers with a certain footprint. Size matters here. The larger you are, the more interesting the Sentinel data lake should be, because now we offer a storage model in addition to log analytics that provides a way better price point in storing data, and also very large amount of data. So now you can increase your retention. You can allow that data to be used as Sentinel data in real time. So I can query that data, which is a bit of a that's an improvement from other storage models we combined with Sentinel before, where once I offboarded data from Sentinel, I couldn't directly query it anymore. In some cases, I would have to import it again to actually make it useful. Defender XDR, it's there, it's ready to go. It's in place in both commercial and government tenants. It's ready to be a bidirectional integration with Sentinel. And for some tenants already, the Sentinel UI that I showed you earlier is not available in Azure anymore. You have to go to XDR to actually use Sentinel. The work analytics workspace that sits below Sentinel, which is the data platform, of course, for Sentinel, is still there and it's still manageable. So you can still manage scripts, automation, connections, connectors, and table settings, and of course retention. The third bullet here, licensing versus compliance. Now we can license all sorts of things. It doesn't give us regulatory compliance. So having MDE, for example, and endpoint protection with Defender for Endpoint doesn't provide you compliance. Having the signals in a system like Sentinel and show evidence of it, that's what we're talking about for compliance. Now, the last bullet here, design decision driven by scope. There are security solution that is based on scope. There are systems out there using other SIEMs than Sentinel. Bottom line is you need to be able to produce the evidence for what you are telling the auditor that you are, in what way you are meeting controls. So if I want to track and report on an incident, which is a straight out control from CMMC, you need to show the records, alerts, and also how your escalation works. I didn't show you that in Sentinel. I do have a system in Sentinel, which is really a workflow for if an event or an incident is raised, I can manage that incident. I can call it open, I can call it a false positive, I can assign it to someone, and ultimately we want to see it be closed, of course, as something resolved. I think the takeaway from this presentation is Sentinel provides evidence-based compliance. And that is, of course, a very strong position to be in, to have an auditor come in and look at how we do things and maybe more so the result of how we do things and show that in real time. The security observability, the visibility of security through signals, correlation, events, and incidents. Of course, a very strong position to be. And since we are layering in security architecture with all the tools that are connected and into Sentinel, this is where we get the layered security integration that we want to see for our customers. With that, thank you for listening. Matt, do you want to open it for questions, or what do you want to do?
Absolutely, yeah. We had 2 questions ahead of time, so let me just pop over to there, or Casey, if you have them available. Oh, here we go. So the first one that was asked was, well, I am in a group that mostly deals with CMMC Level 2. Would like to hear what log analytics / Sentinel features support Level 1, so CMMC Level 1 controls, because I believe there will be a wide-ranging requirement across DoD contracts in this space. And so I think, Karsten, we do you want to go with that answer, or you want me to answer that based on what we talked about? You're on mute if you're talking.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No worries.
No. Let me just put on the screen here what you and I talked about already, as it relates to level 1, just as an example, right? So we can find this many places. Matt, actually used the placemat here just to surface what is available or required for level 1. So if we choose Sentinel, you'll see there's 2 controls popping up here. So the bottom one here is probably where I would say is the strongest use case for Sentinel. Being able to identify, report what's happening, system flaws, incidents in a timely manner. You need something like Sentinel. You need a SIEM. And you could argue, well, I have this in Defender for Cloud. Well, Defender for Cloud only covers Azure workloads or Arc workloads on-prem, right? It doesn't cover, for example, MDE. So to have all of this in one place, and certainly to get to this in a timely manner, you want to correlate this and pull it into the same place. So for that reason, I would say Sentinel should be an answer to this control. So it's not called out explicitly. It doesn't use the word incident anywhere for level 1. We still think that, and also the recommendation I mentioned before with retaining your logs for 1 year gives us a strong use case for Sentinel, also with L1. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's great, Karsten. And I think it's kind of funny that the second question that came in ahead of time is very similar, though I think it has a different approach here. So this was asked, curious about how to best support research requiring CMMC 1, which we kind of talked about there, as well as PII, PHI, and HIPAA controls. So I'll kind of start with this answer, which I think is interesting because I had a conversation with our compliance team last week and about some new frameworks that aren't necessarily defense focused that a customer was asking us to look to support. And while there's industry focused frameworks for sure, right? So like in the finance sector, you might have GLBA. Obviously in the DIB, we've got CMMC and NIST 800-171. Our compliance team had an interesting response, which was, most of these cybersecurity compliance frameworks, when it comes to implementation of controls, are really based on NIST 800-171. And while they might have industry-specific requirements that might change the language or verbiage in the control requirements, essentially they're generally all pretty much the same, with maybe a 10% difference on top of that. So all that to say, if you use NIST 800-171 as a starting point, or you're already there, if you were CMMC assessed and had that assessment, it's a good starting point. And so the kind of bolt on to get to those further compliance frameworks. So for PCI, for example, or this case HIPAA, right? You're going to see references to healthcare data, and the biggest thing, the difference there is I'm going to protect data in generally the same way. It's just which data I'm protecting in which ways, and how do I identify it, right? So if you've got you're a research university, for example, and you're doing research across a medical research grant, surely you're going to be collecting patient data that would be subject to HIPAA protection. And so how you identify and where you store that data then becomes really the kind of important part of that HIPAA certification on that front. But putting the right controls in place at the onset around things like data loss prevention and information protection, those types of things are going to set the baseline for that. So I thought weaving kind of that idea from our compliance team around, most of the frameworks are very similar. So start with 800.171, and you can start to inherit controls across your other compliance frameworks. Was there any other questions? Okay. Well, if anybody does have any questions after this session, feel free to reach out to the YouAlreadyOwnIt alias. We can certainly answer those. We appreciate your time today, and come see us in March for the next topic. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.